Welcome to In Conversation with David Frum. I'm your host, Sean Speer, editor-at-large at The Hub. I'm grateful to be back in conversation with David for another installment of our bi-weekly video and podcast series on the key issues concerning Canadian policy and politics. In the first half of the show, we'll discuss this past weekend's meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Xi from China, and Prime Minister Modi from India, and what it tells us about the state of geopolitics. On the back half of the show, exclusive for the Hub's Heroes and Fellows, we'll discuss the state of Canada's new Democratic Party and its implications for Canadian politics more generally. David, thanks as always for joining me.
Thank you.
David, I've come to rely on your wisdom and insights about geopolitics, America's place in the world, and of course what all this means for Canada, as I know our listeners and viewers have too. Okay. It seems like this meeting this past weekend in China between these three major leaders was something significant. What's your response?
Well, you are completely right. It is significant and it is ominous. Remember, when the Trump people try to rationalize their preference for Russia over Ukraine, why they've been so tough on Ukraine and so favorable to Russia, and this is not an explanation, but it's the rationalization they give. They say it is so important to prevent Russia from drifting into alignment with China. We need to keep Russia and China apart.
Yes.
Now, let's remember, Russia is a country with an economy about the size of Italy, only a little bit bigger than Canada's economy, as a matter of fact. And its population isn't as big as everybody thinks. We remember the old Soviet Union, but Russia itself is a country with a population not greatly different from Germany plus Ukraine put together. And tending to shrink. And it's, of course, quite a backward society. It is a society on its way out of superpowerdom. But for the nuclear weapons, no one would consider Russia these days a first-tier power at all.
Yes.
But India is a first-tier power. India is one of the biggest economies in the world, growing population, producer of extraordinary technology. And India and China have had historically a very tough relationship. The two countries actually went to war in the early 1960s, and they remain quite hostile to this, or until the day before yesterday, because China has often partnered with Pakistan for, again, Chinese and Pakistani reasons. So the China-India relationship, bad. And the United States has benefited from that. Beginning with President Clinton, the United States has moved closer and closer and closer to India. The United States and India have done military exercises together with other Pacific friends and allies, Australia, Singapore, Japan. Trump's blowing all of that up because of, and apparently motivated by his absolutely childish craving for India to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize for his very minimal role in settling the June India-Pakistan fighting. So he's mad at them for not nominating him for the Peace Prize. He's imposed all these tariffs on India. India is a difficult partner. Prime Minister Modi is an authoritarian and difficult leader. And Trump has succeeded in pushing India into the arms of China, a much bigger calamity than having Russia be dependent on China.
Yeah. This is precisely where I wanted to go next, because, as you say, reports are that Trump is motivated by this personal slight, which is something we've come to expect from this president. But if you pull back a bit more, you do get the sense that Western leaders more broadly are rethinking their relationship with India. You know, of course, that we've had these instances where it looks like the Indian government was responsible for the assassination of Canadian citizens here in the homeland. There have been broader instances where India has been less reliable than many anticipated, both with respect to geopolitics, but as you say, also with respect to its own democracy. Setting aside the president for a second, what do you think about the West's relationship with India more broadly?
Yeah. During the Cold War, when the great adversary was the Soviet Union, and the most important partners were European democracies plus Japan, America, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate this because there are many non-democratic partners in the anti-Russia coalition, but basically the United States was able to work as its most important partners, countries that were broadly congenial to the United States and to democracy generally. That's just not going to be true in the 18th century. Who are the most important balancing powers against China, if China is the country you want to balance? India in the first place, Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia. These are all countries it's going to be difficult to work with. And they're all countries that experience colonialism have maybe these days even exaggerated memories of how much they suffered under colonialism, but a lot of mistrust of the European powers in the United States. This is going to be a difficult relationship. And in the India case, because India's internal politics are complicated and not always very nice, there's going to be a trade-off between interior and exterior. As you say, India seems to have launched a campaign of terrorism, not only inside Canada, but also inside Great Britain and the United States against Sikh extremists. And they have used unacceptable methods to suppress Sikh extremism around the world. But it needs to be said as well that they've got a complaint, even though their methods are appalling, because Canada especially has given a lot of license to fundraising for anti-India terrorism. So it's a difficult relationship. It needs to be managed, and that means you can't be distracted by baubles like President Trump's craving for some stupid prize.
Yes.
And to which he sacrifices the geopolitical interests of the United States and the West broadly.
Yeah, well said. Let me set something up for you and then have you react. One of the things that has struck me, not just about the Trump administration, but American conservatives more generally over the past several months, is the extent to which they seem prepared to surrender American global leadership and unipolarity. That their argument seems to be that the cost of unipolarity and global leadership aren't worth it, and that we need to reconcile ourselves with a multipolar world where America has its orbit and China and possibly others have theirs. And one thing I've been wondering in the aftermath of this high-profile meeting over the weekend is whether the Trump administration's actions are precipitating multipolarity or in a way responding to the inevitability of multipolarity. How do you think about that question?
Yeah. Well, you say that so well, and as often with important changes, things are both cause and effect.
Yes.
So MAGA Trumpism is very much driven by basically a desire to retire from American leadership.
Well said.
And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, part of it is fatigue with the burdens and expenses of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Part of it is understanding, look, the reason back in the 50s and 60s the civil rights movement had so much power inside the United States was America was competing for against the Soviet Union all over the world. And it was a real argument. How can we compete in Asia and in Africa if we maintain racial prejudice at home? President Kennedy, in his one big speech on civil rights, which he gave in, I think, 1962, talked about how we cannot send a black soldier to Berlin or Vietnam if that black soldier can't vote or go to a bathroom back home. Yes. And so in the 50s and 60s, the imperatives of the Cold War became a powerful motive, a driver. It's one of the reasons why the American establishment was so united. We have to get rid of the elements of racial segregation because we need to compete with the Soviet Union in Europe and Africa. What if your top priority is racism at home? Well, then you have to withdraw a little bit from the world. If you were saying, if you think, and I thought this is where you were going to go with your question, a lot of the MAGA people in recent months have been saying some really harsh things about Indian Americans. We don't want them immigrating here. We don't want them as competitors. Well, if you're prepared to make enemies of the Indian American community, then obviously you have to get out of the people-to-people business of relationships with the state of India back home.
Yes.
And so I think that's one thing that's going on. That MAGA is very much a domestic form. It's very much about domestic bigotry, and that crimps your ability to be great in the world. But it's also an expression of American defeat and resignation. The people behind MAGA are people who are not optimistic about the future of the United States. MAGA is strongest where American technological development is weakest, where America is least competitive. MAGA gets its votes from the people who are losing in global competition, not the people who are winning. And so they have a view of America's place in the world, which is basically, look, if we can grab Greenland and grab Canada and bully Mexico and make El Salvador our prison state, that's it. And then we write off and maybe have some role in Venezuela. But then it's basically like the risk map. We seal off, yes. You get the territory south of Central America, you get Greenland, maybe you need Iceland. You can't get Kamchatka because they like Kamchatka, but then you seal, but you've got Alaska. You seal off North America, And anyone who's ever played Risk says that's 5 extra points a turn. You're going to lose the game. But that's the MAGA vision of a kind of fortress North America and then let the rest of the world go on its way, even if that means allowing the rest of the world to be led by other states.
Well, stay on the point about cause and effect. If capitals around the world are understanding American policy in those terms, how is a country like India to respond?
A country like India, a country like India is a principal power. So it's not responding in the sense that that Indians would think we have to somehow, with American retreat, we're abandoned in a way that, say, an Australia would think.
Yes.
India, in the 21st century, India is going to be, along with China, along with whatever remains of American power after the United States, along with the European Union, if the European Union can get its act together and form some unity, those are the principal powers of the world. And India will always have its own independent interests and its own independent foreign policy. It is not an ally of the United States in the way that Britain and Japan were. It is not dependent on the United States. It's going to be a near peer of the United States. But you can cooperate with it if you take seriously India's security interests, and if you are agreed and that China is problem number one. It may be true in the second half of the 21st century that it's the United States and China battling or balancing India. That may also happen. Diplomacy changes in all kinds of unpredictable ways. But India is there for the future, along with China, along with whatever remains of the United States, along with the European Union, if it can get its act together.
We've been talking about the meeting between Xi, Putin, and Modi at this event in China, but I want to ask about a speech that Xi himself gave, because it speaks in a way to the self-confidence and outward-looking poise of America in the second half of the 20th century that you talked about earlier. His speech, in a way, conveyed the case that China's understanding of itself, of the organization of its economy, even its system of governance, was superior to liberal democratic capitalism. And for me, David, one of the questions is, can the West draw on a reservoir of self-assuredness and self-confidence to push back at the level of ideas, not just at the level of defense and technology and economy and all the rest?
Well, we're not in the mood these days. In the West, everywhere, the mood is one of retreat, isolationism, provincialism, petty bigotry. And the West is also forfeiting its dynamism and cultural advantages. I mean, in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, every Soviet citizen aspired to wear American blue jeans, or not every, but yes, young ones wanted to wear American blue jeans and listen to American music. American youth are these days imbibing all their ideas from a Chinese propaganda app. It's China that has cultural ascendancy over the minds of American young people. And Donald Trump, in the end, decided not to do anything about that for reasons that look pretty corrupt, because TikTok's algorithm because Trump is the leader of American decline, the Chinese favor him, and TikTok favors him. And so he's decided, even though there's a law passed restricting TikTok in the United States, and even though the Supreme Court affirmed that law as constitutional, he's just going to ignore that law because TikTok suits him. It promotes him, and it promotes him because China knows this guy is terrible for the United States and therefore great for us.
As we wrap up this part of the show, why don't we pull it back to Canada? If you were advising Prime Minister Carney, who's meeting with his cabinet today here in the city of Toronto, looking out at what's happening in Washington and indeed what's happening over the weekend in China, what does this mean for Canada's poise to the world?
Look, as we've said before, Canada does not have so many options as other countries. The Canadian fate is bound to the fate of the United States. So Canada needs, of course, to protect its immediate economic interests with timely reactions to American economic aggression. But it needs to play a long game, because if America's role in the world shrinks, Canada's security and prosperity shrink. Canada is not Australia. It can't do a deal with China. Yeah. Canadians wouldn't want to. You'd become a different kind of society. Remember, the price of a diplomat, China is becoming an increasingly concerned with other countries' internal politics. So the price of your deal with China is not just that you have to appease China in great power politics, not just that you have to become the kind of economic colony of China providing raw materials to them, but you have to let them dictate how the Chinese diaspora inside your country behaves and thinks and feels. And Canadians have experienced that very directly with corruption and sometimes physical intimidation and sometimes outright violence
Yes.
by the Chinese state inside Canada against Chinese Canadian diaspora populations. So it's not a prospect that Canadians would welcome. Canada, it is so indispensable for Canada for the United States to work, and I think that's why Canadians of so many points of view, except for the people on the extreme left and extreme right, have been so united across party lines in recognizing Donald Trump as a danger. Not just because he's waging economic aggression against Canada, but because he's destroying the United States, on which Canada depends so entirely.
Indeed. One final question. I mentioned earlier that you do get the sense that there is a rethink in Ottawa about Canada's relationship with India. How should we be thinking about the relationship with India in light of some of the things that you've set out today?
The relationship with India has to be made to work, but I think the hopes of the 1990s and early 2000s that India would become a fellow democracy, a fellow liberal democracy, I think those hopes look dead. India is going to be its own thing. It's going to be, in many ways, very repressive at home. The intercommunal tensions are worsening. Modi, remember, came to power originally as a first minister of a state where he, on the most charitable reading, turned a blind eye to an anti-Muslim pogrom, and he may have done worse than that, and that's what made him the leader of a Hindu chauvinist party in India. And those kinds of politics are working inside India, and in the United States are being exported to the Indian diaspora too. And the Indians are, I think, learning the lessons that the Chinese can behave so ruthlessly toward their diaspora population, so can India. Yes. And so we see these assassinations and these other terror plots. It's going to be an uncomfortable state, but for the time being, you have to find ways to make the relationship work, difficult and disagreeable as those ways can often be.
Sober yet wise. We're going to end the first half, the free version of In Conversation with David Frum here for listeners who want to pick us up on the back half, where we'll talk about Canadian politics. You can go to the www.thehub.ca to join and subscribe. Otherwise, we'll sign off here and catch up in the back half of the show. Thank you. Bye-bye. This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. Thank you, Airbnb, for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel. We've talked a lot about the housing crisis at the Hub. As you may know, some people think short-term rentals are to blame for taking supply off the market. But that just doesn't make sense. Consider for a moment that the median number of nights an Airbnb host in Canada has guests is just 55. These aren't full-time rental properties. They're honest Canadians trying to get by like the rest of us. And the government's own data supports that. Statistics Canada recently reported that the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs solutions that tackle the whole housing market, not 0.6% of it. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closerlook.